Hi, I'm Alessia, and you're about to watch a message that was preached at Calvary Fellowship in Miramar, Florida. At Calvary, we exist to help you take your next step with God. If you'd like to learn more about Calvary, make sure to download our mobile app on the App Store or Google Play Store by searching up My Calvary.
How's everybody doing? We are so glad that you're here. So, it was about 5 years ago. I was driving to West Palm Beach for a meeting, and it was pouring rain in a way that only South Florida can provide. So just to kind of give you a picture of the scene. I'm on my way to the meeting. A buddy is with me. I'm in the HOV lane, and the car in front of me stops short. I stop short, and then the car behind me hits the back of my car. So I'm so mad at this point. I get out of my car, and this lady comes out and starts yelling at me about how the car behind her hit her, which caused her to hit me. And I'm like, well, where's the car that hit you? Oh, well, they left. I'm like, really? But there's no record. Anyway, so I call the cops. Turns out the car's not hers. She doesn't have the insurance card and doesn't remember the name of the insurance company and can't get a hold of the person whose car it is. So the other thing is that you got to know from this story, which really adds a little commentary to it, is I want you to imagine this little car that she's driving. There's a box, a Dunkin' Donuts box, kind of wedged between on the dashboard with the window. So she gets out, and she's covered in jelly and the powder, like she's eaten 7 or 8 powdered donuts in this, which is probably what caused the accident to begin with. Anyway, so she's telling me how this wasn't her fault. And I say to her, what were you doing in the HOV lane? You're by yourself. She says, well, yeah, that was a mistake, but I was getting off at the next exit, so it's okay. The exit's all the way on the right. Anyway, I wasn't even getting into that. So I'm so frustrated. I had this person was out of town. I had a 2-hour meeting scheduled, and every minute that I stay there, I'm missing out on this meeting. But I hung out for one reason, justice, because justice needed to be served. And so, which there wasn't any, because the cop did not give her a ticket. And I got very frustrated with the cop because I said, she was driving in the HOV lane. That's a ticketable offense. She didn't have proof of insurance. That's a ticketable offense. It wasn't even her car, which probably is a ticketable offense. And you're still not giving her a ticket. And when I drove away, the two of them, the lady and the cop, were laughing as if they were lifelong friends. And now I'm going to tell you, this was not my finest moment. And so I finally get to this meeting about an hour late. And I'm driving home. I'm at this meeting. I'm still piping mad. I'm driving home, and I'm still piping mad about the whole thing. And when all of a sudden the lights turn on and a cop is pulling me over. And I am like, oh, this is not happening. So I pull over. And the cop says, do you know why I pulled you over? And I'm like, sir, there's only one reason why you'd pull me over. You're going to say that I was speeding. And he says, well, you were doing 40 in a 25, so can I have your license and registration? Now, once again, this is not usually how I act, certainly around police officers. I love cops. I love to show cops. Anyway, love cops in general. So I say to him, I'm like, sir, my car just got hit. Now, by the way, if I could just say this about the accident. There was a line maybe that big on my car. And when I got home, I went like this, and the line came off. So I think that's an important thing for you to know, because I may have been overreacting. But at the time, I was in the heat of it. So anyway, I'm like, sir, this car was just in an accident 2 hours ago, and there is no way on this planet that you're giving me a ticket tonight if there is any justice in this world. And the cop, he was so cool with me when I was not. And he goes, sir, are you okay? I'm like, oh, I'm not okay. And he's like, is your license okay? I don't even understand that question. And so anyway, I said yes. I gave him the license and registration. He goes back to his car, which who knows what they do back there. But it's like 2 hours later, then he shows up back. Sorry it took so long, our computer was down. I didn't even know he had a computer back there. And he says, please sign this. And I said, sir, you have to understand something. I'm not having a good night, and I need you to help me. And he says, sir, I'm trying to help you. This is a warning, and I need you to sign it. And now I need you to go home, and I need you to relax. Which I did. Now, if I can just ask it. Anybody ever been that mad? This is a safe place. All right, very good. Wow, all right, good. A lot of angry people here. No sudden movements. Now, here's the challenge that we have. And this is not just with anger, but it's just emotions in general, is that a lot of times we think we can't control them. The truth is we just choose not to. Because what happens is we end up saying things we wish we didn't say. We end up doing things we wish we wouldn't do. And then when it happens, we blame the emotions as if they're a third party. That's how you got to understand, it wasn't me. It was the emotion that made me do that. And that's just not a good excuse. So since we're in the hand-raising mode, how many of you are married? Wow, look at that. Okay, so I don't even have to ask the second question, which is how many of you have been in an argument before? Because the second question is built into the first question. So here's what I'm willing to bet, is that there was a time that you and your spouse have been in an argument. And you've been heated. Well, there's this, and then there's this. And then your phone right, like, let me tell you something else. Hello? Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, praise the Lord. How you doing? And somehow you went from like Mad Max to Mr. Rogers, and just with the click of a button. And it's just this. And listen, the reality is that we have the ability to control our emotions, but a lot of times we just choose to leave them unchecked because it's easier. And that's where the problems begin. So I want to read you this passage that I love, but I want to read it to you in a translation that's called The Message, which is a bit of a paraphrase, but I just love how it captures the essence of the passage. It says this. It says, a sound mind makes for a robust body, but runaway emotions corrode the bones. So what I want to do in the last message of our series, which is called Hindsight, is to talk about what Solomon has to say about leveraging our emotions. Now, for those of you that haven't been with us or you forgot or whatnot, Solomon was the third king of Israel. He was the son of King David. David and Goliath, that story. David eventually became king of Israel. He had a son named Solomon who succeeded him as king in Israel. And what we read is that Solomon was the wisest man in the world up until that time. Some say he was the wisest man ever to live. Jesus, when you read the Gospels, Jesus comments on the wisdom of Solomon. And once again, if Jesus calls you wise, that's something you tell everybody you meet. Because at least that's what I would do, because that's, anyway, people want to, really? Let me hang out with you. Anyway, so Solomon has all of these wise sayings that he says throughout his life, and they get recorded. They get recorded and they get put into a document that we call Proverbs, which is tucked away in the Hebrew scriptures. Now, here's why this is so important. Because all of us have said this. We've said, well, if I knew then what I know now, things would be different. And that's what wisdom does. It takes the understanding that hindsight brings, and it puts it on the front end of a circumstance, the front end of a situation, and it allows us to make wiser choices. And this is especially true when it comes to emotions, because too many hurt relationships, sideways conversations, and personal offenses have been blamed on emotions that were out of control. And so what I want to do in our time together is I want to answer the question of, how do I get my emotions under control rather than having them control me? And here's why the answer to this question is so important. Because we all have words that we've spoken in anger that we wish we could have taken back. We've all done things because we were jealous that we wish we could undo. We've all had opportunities that we've missed because we were fearful and we'd love to have a do-over. And listen, we have to get this right, because everything that matters, our marriages, our friendships, our parenting, our careers, is riding on us handling our emotions well. And Solomon has so much to say on the topic that we can't cover everything, but I want to take three themes that he has and kind of put some of what he has to say in kind of these three buckets that we're going to be able to look at in these three categories, so that we can use our emotions as an ally and an asset rather than a liability. So here's the first thing we have to do. If you're a note taker, number one is recognize this, that I can't grow beyond my emotional maturity. I can't grow beyond my emotional maturity. Let me say it another way. We can't be spiritually mature and emotionally immature. That is an absolute fact. Nobody talks about it, but it is an absolute truth. Listen, we can read the Bible, attend church, join a small group, pray all the time, read theology books in our spare time, but you can't be mature spiritually if you're immature emotionally. This is why so many Christians know a ton about the Bible, but are incredibly judgmental and mean-spirited. Because someone along the way told them something that wasn't true. They told them, if you can just in your memory contain a whole bunch of facts, that means that you're spiritually mature. That's not the case. Spiritual maturity is not a game of memory. That just makes you an educated jerk. Sorry to say it that way. And you know what the cool thing is that spiritual maturity is way better than that. Because spiritual insights in the hands of an emotionally mature person is a force to be reckoned with. That is the type of person who can change the world. Unfortunately, what we see most are emotionally immature people trying to convince a whole bunch of other people that they speak on God's behalf. And it's ugly to watch. Yeah, but don't they have many fine points? Sure, so does a porcupine. But it doesn't mean anything, right? And so, oh, I said that. Now, let me tell you what Solomon says. He says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Now, think about what Solomon is saying, and if we can kind of break this down and look at it, what is Solomon saying culturally that for them that has a huge application for us? The walls of a city spoke many things. They were not just the city's primary defense against invaders, but there was another thing that was equally important, if not more important, as to what the walls represented. The walls of a city spoke of the God that you served and his power to protect you. So when Nehemiah, in the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament, there's this guy named Nehemiah and his desire, if you want to, well, what's the theme of the book? Nehemiah is a guy, he's a cupbearer to the king. He finds out that the walls of Jerusalem have been destroyed. And so the theme of the book is this Jewish guy that wants to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and get the Persians to pay for it. That's basically the theme of the book. And some of you later on, you're going to be like, hey, I get that. But that's basically really? Nothing. Okay. That's what happens. Let me just say it slow for those of you that went to public school. So he gets the Persians. Anyway, forget it. So here's what he says. Now this is important. He says this in Nehemiah chapter 2. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be a disgrace. Now he says this to the leaders of Jerusalem because, notice he doesn't say, because then we'll be protected. That's not the point. He's acknowledging that the walls being broken makes them a disgrace because they're serving God. And God has allowed these walls to be broken. But once again, they're not, Solomon's proverb is that a city with walls broken aren't getting a lot of converts to the faith because they would say, like, well, serving your God doesn't work. That's why the city's broken and you got ransacked. But what he says, that's why he says, happens when we don't have self-control. We repel others from inquiring about God. And have you noticed that nobody has a problem with Jesus? I've never talked to anybody. I've talked to so many people over the years who aren't Christians, and I've never had one person say, my real problem is Jesus. I'm so sick of that forgiveness rhetoric, right? Nobody's got a problem with Jesus. Many people have a problem with Christians, and they have a problem with immature Christians. And listen, if you're here and you're not a Christian, you're like, well, my problem with what reason I'm not a Christian is because of Christians. We get it. We got a problem with them too. They're like that weird family member that we're ashamed saying we're related to. And if you're like, well, I don't have a weird family member, that's because it's you. I'm sorry to be the guy to tell you that, but that's just how it is. But here's what keeps us from being like that, is that we grow emotionally and spiritually. And here's the cool part, is that you can know if you're growing emotionally and spiritually. We know that, we can actually know it. Why? Because everyone else can see it. Because they see it in our actions. Emotional maturity is visible to everyone. So, the Apostle Paul is a guy, if you're not aware, he was a Jewish leader who had been given authority to imprison, injure, or even kill people who had converted to the Christian faith from Judaism. He would travel to different cities doing this, and he was like, if you can pardon it, kind of like a first century version of John Wick. And I guess only a few people admitting they saw that movie. John Wick, who is this? Gospel of John? I don't know. I'm not sure. Anyway, so what happens is that he's on his way to a city called Damascus. He has this encounter with Jesus, and his life is totally changed. He actually then starts preaching for Jesus, the resurrection, all this stuff, telling people to convert to Christianity. It's really an incredible thing. Well, as he becomes a Christian leader, he hears about, there's this church that he starts in an area that's called Galatia. Galatia is in what was called Asia Minor back then. It's kind of like modern day Turkey. But he writes a letter to these Christians because they're struggling with something we tend to struggle with sometimes. Because what their issue was, they were kind of leaning towards, man, we just really like all of the laws that are in what we would call the Old Testament, the 613 laws. And the reason why they were, and now the technical term for it is legalism. And legalism is, I want to adopt all of the laws, and if I can keep them well enough, it means that things are okay with me and God. And it doesn't matter how I treat other people, because as long as I'm keeping these laws, I'm good. And see, Paul writes this letter to them, and he says, hey, listen, you can't love God and ignore people. You can't love God and treat people poorly, because your love for God comes out in how you treat people. And then he gives us, and this is my point, the litmus test for maturity. And he shows us this in Galatians. He says, now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like. There's a common denominator on all of this, and that is that all of these actions are incredibly selfish and incredibly immature. Thankfully, he doesn't say, all right, guys, so we'll just, peace out. No, he goes on. Look at what he says. Here's the next verse. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering. Now, some translations say patience. I like long-suffering, because if you've ever been to the DMV, you're not being patient. You are long-suffering, all right? That's why I like that better. So long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. So Paul is saying the evidence that God is at work in your life is marked by loving and self-controlled actions. It's what emotionally mature people do. That's why you can't grow spiritually beyond your emotional maturity. So if that's the case, what do I need to do second? The second thing we need to do is become emotionally self-aware. Now, here's how Solomon would say it. He says, fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. Solomon says that foolish people cannot control their emotions. They just let loose and explode with whatever they're feeling. You see, the first thing that needs to happen is that we've got to know what we're feeling. And I want to tell you something, that if we were to kind of poll the room, some of us kind of swing between two pendulums. Some of us are feelers, and we feel everything. We feel not only what we feel, but what other people feel. And then others of us swing we're more thinkers. And so I'm way on the thinker side. My wife is way on the feeling side, and we argue with everything in between, which is usually how it works for me and for you. And so now here's what happens. Now I'm going to tell you something, and I'm a bit embarrassed by this, but naturally I'm not self-aware. Emotionally, I have a hard time figuring out what I'm feeling at times. And sometimes I'm asking my wife, hey, can you tell me what I'm feeling right now? Because I'm not positive. And now, this, my wife likes telling this story, just to give you an idea. This happened a while back, probably about a few months ago. So I wake up with terrible stomach pain one day. And I'm asking my wife, and I'm like, oh, my stomach is killing me. And she's like, my wife goes into like Dr. Quinn medicine woman mode. And she's like, is it a sharp pain or a dull pain? And I'm like, yes, it is. And she's like, that's not a yes or no question. And anyway, so she's like, well, point to the part of yours. I'm like, it's like right around here. She's like, we got to be a little more. Anyway, so I point to where it hurts, and she says, okay, Bob, you're hungry. And I ate something. True enough, she was right. And but that's just weird. But I felt great afterwards. Now you say, well, I'm not that bad. Well, emotionally, it's different. It takes a little more work to be emotionally aware of what you're feeling, especially for those of us that tend to default to unhealthy emotions that we feel comfortable with. Now, I've been saying this, and I'm talking specifically to guys. After the first 2 services, I've had ladies come up to me and say, it's not just the guys. Ladies experience this too, but I'm not a lady, so I'm going to talk to the guys. But for many guys, anger is the default emotion. And the problem is that there are moments where anger is the right emotion, but everything can't make you angry. And what happens is that what we tend to do, and this usually happens at an early age, where you tend to use a certain emotion like anger to protect yourself from things that you're dealing with, that is, with other emotions that you should be feeling. And so for a lot of us, we've gone a lifetime and we've never felt anything else except whatever it is, the one default feeling that we go to. And once again, that's why I say it's a little bit embarrassing for me, is because when I decided about 5 years ago that I said I have to deal with my anger and get it, and I have struggled with anger most of my life, and it was around the time I turned 40 that I said, I've got to deal with this. I mean, I'm hurting everybody around me. And I decided, I just don't want to be an angry person anymore. The problem is that I started experiencing emotions for the very first time. I mean, things that I had never felt before. Things that most people had been feeling throughout their whole life. I was experiencing things for the very first time. And so because and I remember the first time I went to see a counselor about this, I was talking to her about the, anger and whatever, and she shows me this chart. And this chart has like happy face, sad face, surprised face, whatever, like all these emojis. And she's like, this is what I show, 7-year-old patients. And I'm like, well, that's pretty much where I am emotionally. I'm like second grade emotionally. And so anyway, I felt like after a bit I needed something a little more robust. And so I found this chart online. Now this chart right here, I keep this with me everywhere. It's on my computer, it's on my iPad, it's on my phone. I've thought about getting it tattooed on the inside of my arm. So it's, like Tom Brady, he picks up, okay, that's the play we're going with. So I can figure out what I'm feeling. Because a lot of times I'll come home and my wife I'll talk to she's like, hey, how were things at church today? Well, things were good, then this kind of happened. And once again, she's like, so how do you feel? Once again, I didn't feel anything before. Because, and I tell people this, that for anger for me, for most of my life, was like the Iron Man suit. This is how I protected myself from everything from the time that I was about 7 or 8 years old. I protected myself from every other emotion. The problem is that was the only gear that I operated in. And that was the problem. So now I'm 40, and my wife is like, how do you feel? And I'm taking out my phone. She thinks I'm ignoring her. And I'm like, hold on. I'm getting my chart. Turns out I'm hurt. She's like, are you really? I'm like, yeah, but I didn't know. This is the first time I've ever felt that, ever. Because every time I was hurt, I'd get mad. And it was instantaneous. And this is part of the challenge. And now listen, and I've talked to so many people in between services today that say that they want to start the journey. And I want to tell you something. If you go down this road, this is a process. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get it perfect. There's going to be moments where you kind of go back to old habits because there's muscle memory here that you've got to kind of unlearn. You don't become a master of your emotions over a weekend. But the thing about change, it's not automatic. But when you decide to change, things eventually change. It's not overnight. Because once again, you're retraining your mind. You're experiencing emotions sometimes for the first time. And the great news is that it can happen. And you can, I can tell you honestly that I feel like I've turned a corner in my life. I don't get angry. I mean, like 1/100th of the times that I used to. In fact, there are moments that I want to get angry that I can't, and I find that very frustrating. Because that's a new thing, frustration. That was a new emotion for me. So I remember this like 2.5 years ago. we were remodeling. I have an office at home, and so we had these closets that were basically useless. And so we said we were going to rip out the closets and just put bookshelves there. And so I called this company that had great reviews. So gave them a deposit, and then they were going to come and do it. And 4 months later, they weren't done. I mean, this should have taken no more than a week to get done, and they didn't get it done. So they told me, well, we're going to be there at 10 o'clock. Well, they didn't even show up or call me. And so I was on the phone with one of my friends, and he's like, look, you need to call them, and you need to tell them what's up, and you need to set them straight. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I need to call them, and I'm going to give them the angry Bob, you know. And so I remember, this is a true story. I tell my wife, I got to make a phone call. So I go outside, because I don't want Carrie and the kids to see this. I don't want them to see kind of the old Bob. So I go in my driveway. I must have looked like a lunatic. So I got my phone, and I'm like this, and I'm like, okay, here we go. And I'm trying to work myself up. I don't know if you saw Infinity War, but I'm like Bruce Banner trying to summon the Hulk, right? And I'm like, okay, here we go. And I'm like, I'm going to give them the thunder. And now I'm talking with a deep breath, and I'm like, they're going to get it. I'm like a death metal singer, you know, like, here we go, you know, right? So then I'm calling the number, and I'm like, oh, they're in for it, right? So I get it. I'm like, here we go. Hey guys, listen, I got this problem with, right? I'm like, I just can't do it. I can't do it. Like, I can't muster up the thunder. You know, I told my friend, he called me after, he's like, what happened? I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I need like anger Viagra. And I just can't work myself up, you know, and if the anger lasts more than 4 hours, call a doctor. And I shouldn't have said that. That's the stuff I get emails about. You know, we really love your messages, but sometimes you're just too far. Too far, Pastor. I know, because I got another email that was exactly the same. So, anyway, back to, it's like, I don't know, the pastor said something about Viagra. That's the last thing I heard. And so now, once again, doesn't mean you're not direct and all that. And I remember telling them, I'm like, look, you guys are completely incompetent, and you're either showing up tomorrow or I'm calling my credit card company and doing a back charge on the deposit. And they're like, well, sir, we're so sorry. I'm like, oh, by the way, we're also renegotiating the price due to my pain and suffering. And which, by the way, they knocked 50% off the price. And listen, it's like they were paying me to not get angry, which was fantastic. And that's what, you know, I was telling a friend of mine, and I said, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm just being tested by God to see if the anger is really gone. And I'm just determined to pass the test. And once again, it's easy to say like, hey, I'm not going to get mad anymore. I'm not angry. You know, it's like what you need is the people around you to say that, to see that. And I remember sitting one night at dinner, and my daughter Livy, she's going to be 8 right after Christmas, but she was about 3.5 at the time. We were having dinner, and we were talking about something, and she kind of, whenever she's like wants to speak to you, like speak something into your life, she kind of grabs you by the cheeks and squishes them, because this is how you're really receptive to life. And so she grabs me by the face, and she says to me, and she says, Dad, you're okay now. All the madness is gone. And which I always thought was pretty funny, like madness as being mad. Like that's how she interpreted that at 3.5. And which I thought was amazing, and I started to cry when she said that. Once again, these were all feelings I've never kind of had before. And I want you to hear what Solomon has to say. He says this: he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Emotional health is about learning how to rule your own spirit and not letting it rule you. So here's the last thing. So what do I need to do? The last thing I need to do is I need to think beyond the moment. Here's what I mean by that. A lot of times we let emotions get the best of us, and we end up saying or doing things that we regret. And listen, because in the moment, if we're being honest, we wanted to hurt the other person. We wanted to be right. We wanted to let off some steam. But then the thing that we weren't expecting was the wreckage that brought. And then here's how we try to fix it. We try to fix it by saying, well, no, I didn't mean it. Problem is, People have said that to us, and we know it's not true. They did mean it. They presented a truth in the worst possible form, and that's why it hurt so much. Because this is the exact opposite of love covering a multitude of sins. Solomon, once again, here's what he says. Just as damaging as a madman shooting a deadly weapon is someone who lies to a friend and then says, I was only joking. I tell my kids this all the time. I say, before you say anything to one of your friends, to your brother, to your sister, before you say anything to your mom or me, you got to think about the trajectory of your words. Play them out to their logical conclusion, right? Anybody, if you're willing to answer, anybody here ever had buyer's remorse? They bought something and you're like, oh no, what, right? Then this is, all of us have, right? And it's because we didn't take that decision. We didn't follow it to its logical conclusion. If we've ever said words that we regretted the second they came out, we didn't take our words and play them out to their logical conclusion, which is why Solomon says this. He says, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. So, where do we go from here? If you are struggling with some kind of destructive emotion, sometimes the first step is owning it and saying, yeah, I'm not just a person who gets angry sometimes, I'm an angry person. And I got to deal with that, and we got to stop dismissing it as acceptable behavior. And here's the challenge that we have. It's not an excuse, but here's the challenge, is that those of us that struggle with destructive emotions think everyone is like us and that this is normal. I was shocked. When I started my journey, I was shocked to learn that most people weren't angry all the time. I had no idea. And we have to learn to be open to people speaking truth into our lives without getting defensive, because if we do, people will stop telling us the truth. And worse yet, we're going to find ourselves alone. We have to accept truth because Jesus made us a promise. He said that if you know truth, the truth will set you free. So I want to tell you something that happened to me this week. I have a dead palm tree in my front yard. And I was going to cut it down, and we didn't cut it down. And then woodpeckers showed up. And woodpeckers started making holes in the palm tree and living in the palm tree, which that's not really that bad, until the bees showed up. And the bees then made the palm tree their home and evicted the woodpeckers. And so they started this colony in the palm tree, and it started getting out of control. So I actually called a tree trimmer, and I'm like, I need to cut this tree down. And he comes out and he says, listen, you got to deal with the bees before I can cut this tree down. And I'm like, come on, man, what's the worst that could happen? He's like, is that a joke? And I'm like, we cut the tree down, we run for it, and then we deal with it, you know? And he's like, no. And he's like, look, call somebody who deals in bees, and we'll coordinate, and we'll deal with the bees and cut the thing down. So I call a guy who from Calvary, and who deals in bees and critters and all of that. Hey, could he help me with my husband? Maybe he does that too. So anyway, but he comes over and coordinates with the tree guy. And on Wednesday, he gets this. Now, mind you, it's about a 30-foot tree. About 25 feet up is where the opening is, which is where all the bees are, coming in and out. So that's kind of the front door. And he uses this chemical to neutralize the bees. And by the way, neutralize is code for kill the bees. And so he does that, and then the tree guy comes and cuts down the palm. What was amazing to me is that the palm comes down in my front yard, and then he starts cutting it in sections, and he opens up, and let me show you what was in there. And that was one piece. There was a trash bag full of this. And my wife was like, I don't know, there must have been like 5,000 bees living in there. And he goes, no, it was probably closer to 80,000 bees living in the tree. And he says, if you had not taken care of the bees and you knocked down that tree, it would have killed someone. Now here's my point. If you and I don't deal with the destructive emotions that are inside of us, it won't just kill us. It will kill everyone around us. And I know that you don't want that. We just don't know how to change it because a lot of times the feelings that we resort to are all that we know. Once again, the Apostle Paul says it this way. He says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. God wants to change your life if you're open to it and willing to take the journey with Him. And it may not be instantaneous, but if you change things, things eventually change. And you will look back and you will find the thing that you've been seeking, which is joy. Listen, I gave anger so much of my life, and it is a regret that I live with daily. But today I can tell you that I wake up with joy. I wake up with a deep joy. The thing I've been seeking all my life came into my life when I finally stopped trying to protect myself and hide behind the thing that was destroying me from the inside. Solomon didn't write this. It was Solomon's dad, David, who wrote this. He said this. He said, weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. I want that for you. I want that for your family. I want that for your future. I do. With all of my heart, I want that for you. And what I want to invite you to do is to take the journey with Jesus, who said that there is a thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He says, but I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. And that's what He offers us if we'll take Him up on the offer. Let's pray together. And God, we want to thank you so much for loving us, for working in us, for not leaving us as we are to kind of deal with our issues. Instead, you want to transform us if we'll trust you. So God, if we're struggling with whatever emotion that's just taking control of our lives and hurting those around us, God, help us take the journey. Help us to not let what's inside hurt anyone around us, but instead that we could find the deep joy that we've been seeking. God, do that work, we pray, and we pray it in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen.
Thanks for watching this week's message. Make sure to click the subscribe button below to stay up to date with all the things happening here at Calvary. God bless you.